Hi everyone, welcome back to MEG Motors. Today we're going to be working on the 7th piece of our 7-piece flip series. So we bought 7 pieces of equipment for $80. It was 6 chainsaws and this one blower. This is a Craftsman 200-mile-an-hour blower. It's obviously an older blower. You can tell just kind of by looking at it. And it's probably not worth a ton of money. I'm thinking this is a $50 blower probably at best, but yeah, we're going to go ahead and take a look at it and see if it's worth fixing, and if it is, see what we have to do to fix it. And so just like all the equipment we work on, we need 3 things to make this run. We need compression, we need spark, and the spark has to occur at the right time, and we need fuel. And so I pulled this through. It has some compression. It doesn't feel like it's got a ton of compression, but I think it's got enough. And so we're going to open up the air filter and we're going to do a start on spray test. So we're going to spray some carburetor cleaner into the throat of the carburetor, and we're going to see if it'll at least attempt to start. And if it'll attempt to start, that'll tell us that the ignition system is good and the compression is sufficient for this to run. And so yeah, so there's no trigger on this one. It's got a throttle lever over here and it's got a choke lever over here. So we're going to go open with the choke. And we're going to go open with the throttle. Let me confirm that. Yeah, open with the throttle. And we're going to spray a little spray in there. Then we're going to pull it through. Let's see what happens. I don't think there's any kill switch on this. I think we just turn it off with the throttle. So let's see what happens. All right, so we got a start out of it. That's a good sign. That tells us that we have enough compression to run and that our ignition system is working to some degree at least. So I've done a quick look over. The primer bulb is cracked and disintegrating, and I've looked in the fuel tank and the fuel lines are broken. So we know we're going to have to do our standard primer bulb, fuel line, and carburetor overhaul on this one. And hopefully that's all it'll take to make it run. But let's start some disassembly. Our carburetor's underneath this cover. I'm hoping it'll be relatively easy to get off, but I looked a little bit at the fuel lines and they kind of look like they run down in through the case, so I'm not sure how much trouble it's going to be to put fuel lines on this, but let's at least get the carburetor off and we'll go from there. All right, so to get started taking the carburetor off, we're going to take these 2 screws out right here. Going to kind of make, oh, look at that, whole carburetor just kind of fell off. It came off with the cover, which is fine. Excuse me. It came off with the cover, and there we go. I'm not sure what carburetor we have here. We're going to have to clean this up a little bit, and then we'll open it up and see what's going on inside. And so here's the thing with the fuel lines, right? They're falling off right here, so they're obviously broken, and they go in through a little foam grommet right here, and then they go down to the tank. The tank's over here, so I don't know how much disassembly we're going to have to do to get access to install fuel lines, but I'm going to get a flashlight. I'm actually going to stop and I'm going to clean this up a little bit. This is really dirty in here. I'm going to clean this up a little bit. Going to clean that carburetor up, and then we'll come back and we'll do a little more investigation to see what we're going to have to do to get fuel lines on this and get a carburetor overhaul. All right, so I looked this over a little bit, and the fuel lines go in through this opening right here, and they go way up top and they go in through the top of the fuel tank, because the fuel tank is over here. And so a part of me wants to try to do this without taking the cases apart, but I'm pretty sure that that's just not going to happen. It's going to be way too difficult. It's got 2 different size fuel lines, a large one and a small one, and it's going to be very, very difficult to try to get those lines in without splitting the cases. So I'm just not going to waste the time. I'm going to go ahead and split the cases right away. And so first thing we got to do is take the tube off. And then there's a bunch of screws around the perimeter here. We're going to take all of those off and see if we can get this case to split. All right, well, that was a fair bit of work to get that off. There are some hidden screws. It took me a while to find all the screws, but here's our tank, and the fuel lines, like I was telling you, they go into the top of the tank right here. And when this was in the ski, or in the blower, those lines would have had to come in through way up here. And I just don't think there was any way I would have got that done without taking the cases apart. But now that the cases are apart, we can pull a couple of lines in there, and then we'll put this all back together, and that should take care of our fuel lines. We'll work on the carburetor and see if we can get it to run. All right, let's see if we can pull some fuel lines into this tank. So as I mentioned, there's two fuel lines. There's a large one and a small one. The large one is the return line, and the small one is the feed line. So when we pump the primer bulb, the fuel will come out of the tank through the hose in this hole. It'll go through the carburetor, and it'll come back through the hose in this hole in the carburetor. And so we need to pull fuel lines into both of these holes. And to do that, we're going to use this tool, which has a hook on one end and a pull ring on the other. And we can feed it down in through the tank and out the opening. Then we'll take our fuel line, we'll cut a taper on it, which this one already has. And we're going to poke a hole in the end of it. If it doesn't, yeah, there we go. Whoop. And then we're going to use that hole to feed this hose onto our tool. We're going to apply a little bit of lubricant to the line to help it slide through the tank. And then when we pull our tool back, we should hopefully pull the line out of the tank. Now when I shook the tank out, I got some broken pieces of fuel line, and I got this piece right here. And this piece is just a retainer. And so the return line, this is the return line, only needs to go into the tank a short way. It's just there to dump fuel back into the tank. And so we have to be careful that the line doesn't get pulled out of the tank. And so what we'll do is we'll put this fitting on right here, which swells the end of the line just enough so that it can't come back out of the tank. Then we'll pull this line all the way through until we feel that hit the end of the tank. And so that's our return line. That's what that should look like. And then this is our pickup line. And so this is a small, very flexible line. And the idea is that when we have the weighted pickup in here, we want the line to be flexible enough for this to flop all around inside the tank. And a line like this is too stiff. Now, I don't think that's really all that important on a trimmer, because we don't use a trimmer in a lot of different attitudes, but chainsaws we do. So we're doing this on a chainsaw. It's important to do that. But we're going to do it the right way anyway. But the problem is that the tool won't fit through the small hole. And so what I've done is I've made a separate tool like this one, which is just made out of a piece of safety wire. I just bent a hook in the end and cut it off. And so I can do the same thing with this tool. Now I'm going to feed this into the tank out through the opening. I'm going to cut a taper in our fuel line, poke a hole, and we'll try to get that on this tool, just like that. Little lubricant, and we're going to try to pull this line in as well. Yeah, there we go. All right, and so on the other end of this line, now we need a weighted fuel pickup, and that's what this is. Now this is a pretty tight fit because the fitting on there is fairly large and the hole in this hose is fairly small. I'm going to lube this up a little bit as well. We're going to see if we can work this hose onto this pickup. Alright, so there we go. So we have our pickup on the end of the hose. We'll drop that down in the tank. And we're just going to pull this hose out until we have what we believe to be the right amount of fuel line in the tank. And so that's still too much. There we go. Now the vibration of the trimmer, if we're actually using it and flipping it from side to side, will help that swap sides in the tank. So there's our fuel lines in place. Now we can put this tank back in the trimmer and put the sides back together, and then we'll be ready to work on the carburetor. All right, so let's work on putting our case back together. We're gonna run the fuel lines out through the opening where they belong. Set our gas tank back in place. Our handle has to go on. And our pull starter goes out here. And then we have to set our case on. And at the same time, get this to go back on. And this has a spring. So I practiced putting this in a couple of times, and it's a little bit difficult, but we'll see what we can do. That spring right there. All right, so we got this piece in, but we lost our starter. All right, let's try this again. Let's see. All right. We'll put our muffler back on. All right, and then we have our final cover for this side. All right, so that gets us our fuel lines that we need. Let's work on overhauling the carburetor, and then we'll see if we can make this run. Okay, so let's take a look at our carburetor here. I believe this is a Walbro. I don't see Walbro on it, but it has a Walbro number. a WT, which is a typical Walbro number. It could be a Chinese replica, and they didn't put the Walbro on it. I don't know. Usually if it's Walbro, you see that written on there somewhere. All right, standard diaphragm style carburetor. We have a fuel pump with a primer on one side and a metering chamber on the other side. And so the fuel pump will pump fuel out of the tank, and there'll be a passage across the carburetor, and that passage will allow fuel from the fuel pump to get over to the metering chamber, where it's made available to the engine for running. And so we're going to open the fuel pump side first. Obviously we've got to put a primer on it. Wow. Yeah. All right, so this is our fuel pump side. It's got some gummy old gas in there, but on the fuel pump side, we need to make sure that this diaphragm, which is the fuel pump diaphragm, is not torn or ripped. It doesn't have any holes in it, and it looks good. And these two flaps have to be present, and they have to be soft and flexible, which these are. And so while it looks a little bit dirty and it's got some gummy old gas in it, I don't see anything terribly wrong with it. This is a screen. This is the passage that goes across the carburetor to get fuel from the fuel pump to the metering chamber. And this is a screen that acts as a filter. And it's very, very dirty. It's got some old gas and a lot of gunk on it right there. So we're going to have to clean that for sure. Yeah. All right, so let's open up the metering chamber side, see what's going on over here. So this is our metering chamber side. And so fuel is normally stored here for the engine to use when it runs. And this diaphragm, this metering diaphragm, sits on top of this. And so as the engine pulls fuel out of this chamber, this diaphragm will be pulled down into the chamber until the button on it right there contacts this lever. And as it depresses the lever, it will unseat the needle, and that will allow fuel to flow back into the chamber, refill the chamber, and the diaphragm will rise up off of the needle, off of the lever, allowing the needle to seat. And so the problem that we see is these diaphragms get stiff, and this one's pretty stiff. I don't know if you can hear that, but it's a little bit crunchy. And so when these get stiff, they can't move like they need to. And so this needle will either get stuck open, which will cause the carburetor to flood, or it won't be able to open at all, in which case the engine will starve for fuel. And so we're definitely going to have to put a new diaphragm on there. This is both a diaphragm and a gasket, by the way, so I'm going to separate those. Yeah, that's pretty crispy. So I'm going to grab a new diaphragm, and we'll put that in there. We're also going to take the needle out and take a look at it. So you want to hold your thumb over the lever when you do that, because this is spring loaded. All right, and there's our needle. Yeah. And so that tip should be black, and it's a little gray. It's got some junk on it. So we'll clean all that up. I'll grab some parts. We'll get a new primer bulb, a new metering diaphragm, and yeah, we'll put this back together. All right, so I had the right diaphragm in my spares. And so we're going to work on putting this carburetor back together. I pulled a new primer bulb, and so that's going to go right on top of here. And we're going to go ahead and put the fuel pump side back together first. That goes on right there. That goes on there, and then 2 screws. All right, and so then on our metering chamber side, we're going to clean the needle. So we're going to spray a little bit of carburetor cleaner in the corner. We're just going to spin that needle in there. You can see the dirt coming off of it. Now we got a nice black tip needle. So we're going to put that back where it goes. Going to put the spring in place. Then we'll put the lever, and if you notice the lever has a dimple on it, that dimple goes on the spring, and then we work the fork up under the needle. Then you can look from the side hopefully and you can see that the spring is in the right place. And so then we'll put our retainer screw in. If I can get it separated from everything else. All right, and then we're going to check the height of the lever. In most cases, if you don't change the lever or the needle, then the height of the lever is going to be okay. But it is important that it be correct, and so we're going to check it just to be sure. And you need a gauge like this to check some of them anyway. In this case, this carburetor is a WT. When we look at the model number, it says WT, and we see WT right there. So we're going to use this part of the gauge to check our lever. And so we're going to just place the gauge across the gasket surface, and if it's correct, the lever should just barely touch the gauge. And this one looks really, really good. So we're going to leave that just like that. We are going to put our gasket goes on first on this side, and then our diaphragm goes in place. Our cover goes on. Then we'll just screw it back together. All right. Let's put this back on and see if we can make this run. All right, so we're going to run a primer test first. We can kind of see the lines over here, but they're pretty hard to see. And we're going to pump the primer, and we should see the primer fill up with fuel. And there it is. We got fuel in the primer. And fuel going back to the tank. So I think we are ready to start this one. Let me reset the camera and we'll give this one a try. All right, so let's see what happens. We're going to try to start this up here inside the shop, but sometimes a blower like this blows too hard for us to run really hard. So we'll just at least see if it starts. We got it on full choke and full throttle. We've already pumped the primer. So let's see what happens. All right, there was the first start. All right, sounds like we need a little carburetor adjustment. Let me see what tool we need for this one. All right. So this one needs a tool, a spline tool. So there's a number of the carburetor adjustment screws on some of these carburetors can't be adjusted with a screwdriver. They take a special tool. And so you can buy a full set of the tools, like this set. They're only about $15, and it comes with a bunch of different special tools. And if you're going to work on a lot of these, you kind of need that set. But we got the spline tool here. I'm going to open up the high speed just a little bit, and let's restart this and see if that helped. All right, well that sounds pretty good. I mean, it runs now at least. That's a big step, right? The carburetor was acting a little funny, but sometimes they do that when you first get them running again after they've sat. We don't know how long it's been since this has run. The high-speed mixture was being kind of erratic, but eventually it kind of straightened out, and yeah, now it sounds good. I'll probably put the tube back on and I'll go use it out in the yard a little bit and make sure that it's okay, but I think we can call this one fixed. Kind of a standard repair for this, fuel lines, a primer bulb, and a carburetor overhaul. The parts that we used only cost me a few dollars, probably $5. And we're considering that each of the pieces that we bought cost me about $12 because I got 7 pieces for $80, so we're just kind of rounding it up to $12. $12 and $5 in parts. I got $17 in this. I don't expect it to bring a lot of money. It'll probably sell for $50 or so, but still $50, that's profit, right? And so we'll add that to the profit that we make on the other pieces and see how we do overall. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe. Check my playlist. There's obviously video videos on the repair of the other 6 pieces that we did, the 6 chainsaws, and there's other videos out there of other pieces that I fixed. So check my playlist, and yeah, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.